Jonathan Lethem is a writer who starts out publishing very firmly in the genre context as a science fiction and fantasy writer and moves to a great deal of mainstream success, including a MacArthur Genius Grant. If I seem in another video about another writer to be implying a comparison between his career path and, say, Kelly Link's, maybe. They're both MacArthur Genius Grant winners, born in the 60s, who start out in science fiction. Um, Lethem has more mainstream success than Link for one simple reason. He is, by definition, a better novelist in that Link has only published short stories to date. So, in terms of confirmed novelistic achievement, Lethem is going to do better. Lethem is born in Brooklyn. He grows up in he grows up in an extremely bohemian, artistic environment. He has hippie parents who are the people who come to gentrify before the real gentrification. They're the pre-gentrifiers, the pre-gentrifier, like the first web of gentrification. The white gentrifiers who don't actually have any money. His father, Lethem's father, is a visual artist, a respected painter. Lethem studies visual art. He goes to an arts high school. He goes off to Bennington College, drops out after about, I think, a year and a half. So he has no BA, by the way, though he teaches college because publication track record. At Bennington in the 80s was a hotbed of creative writing, and there Lethem met other young writers who would be published very successfully sooner than Lethem would. Most importantly, the novelist Bret Easton Ellis, who had a novel deal before he graduated, and the novelist Donna Tartt, who was published a few years, her first novel came out a few years after graduation. Extremely successful mainstream authors who are very hip and were part at the time of a kind of clear to the reviewers literary movement that Lethem wasn't in and didn't relate to and had no part of. He doesn't seem to bear these people any grudge, but he was doing something else. He drops out of school. He goes to San Francisco, to Berkeley, Philip K. Dick Central. In the next video, we will be talking about Lethem's deep engagement in art and kind of as a super fan of Philip K. Dick. He goes there. He works as a used bookstore clerk. Working his way up to one of the top ones, as he calls it, Moe's, the fabulous Moe's on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley. He begins writing science fiction fantasy for little magazines. He's in magazines like Asimov's, I think in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. He's in smaller magazines too. About 10 or 15 years ago, a creative writing faculty member who will go unnamed, not necessarily at Cleveland State, said to me, do you think of him as science fiction? I'm like, I forgot to just take this off the shelf. This is an early Jonathan Lethem production, or an early publication, a little magazine, an underground science fiction magazine. You can clearly see the words science fiction fantasy and Jonathan Lethem. That weren't enough. He's co-writing with Carter Schultz, who is undeniably and would not deny being a genre writer. Interestingly, this is one of the only copies of Crank I have. Most of my other issues of this magazine are in storage. But you will note, maybe Robert will note, that there's a kind of televangelist figure. This is published in '95, the same year Amnesia Moon was. And you see here someone with a kind of televangelist head and a woman's body. So make of that what you will. I was surprised myself. I knew there was surreal art on here. I didn't realize how on the nose the comparison was. This just happens to be the one I have in the house. His first two novels, Gun with Occasional Music and Amnesia Moon, are clearly in the science fiction, are formally science fiction, are clearly meant to be read as science fiction. And he viewed himself as a science fiction author. He eventually moves away. He has said here I'm going to read from his Paris Review interview. First of all, he gets a Paris Review interview. And he's talking about Dick. Pulp SF of the 1930s magazine type is folk art. Then Dick comes along and isolates those tropes that connect it to literature, surrealism, film, comic books, rock and roll. He's George Harriman, he's Buster Keaton, he's Bob Dylan. Dick discards the uninteresting stuff, the pedantic explanations, and preserves precisely the dreamlike, surrealist, evocative, paranoid reverberations that were all I ever cared for when I found them scattered elsewhere. I couldn't imagine that someone else would think Dick had thrown out the wrong stuff, which is exactly what many who exalt the genre think. There, I think you hear Lethem's argument for why he's leaving the genre. That he likes the surrealism, he likes things he finds in Dick, and doesn't like in people like Heinlein, Asimov, etc. And he feels that genre SF has stuck to the things that he would have thrown out, and thrown out the things he exalts. His first mainstream success, Motherless Brooklyn, winner of various awards, strikes me as extremely generic. It's a mystery novel, and it's got a structuring gimmick. The detective has Tourette's syndrome, so like think of Monk, but he did it earlier and harder core, and it's a different cognitive challenge. That is also a way of going back. And then his big success, The Fortress of Solitude, winner of various prizes, accolades, big reviews. A couple years after The Fortress of Solitude, MacArthur Genius Grant. Lethem is now considered, I mean, the run-up to his Paris Review interview compares him to a group that includes Michael Chabon, David Foster Wallace, Colson Whitehead, etc. So one of the champion young male literary lions, or now mid-career literary lions at the moment. Is it fair to compare Lethem to David Foster Wallace? Well, when David Foster Wallace died, Pomona College, where Wallace had been teaching, hired Lethem to replace him. So I would say yes. Amnesia Moon is somewhat apprentice work. It's his sophomore effort. It is composed of a lot of his juvenilia, in fact. He'd been writing a bunch of apocalyptic short stories that weren't gelling. He's sewn them together into one kind of tapestry of disparate apocalypses. Wondering, not a single dystopia, but just a post-apocalypse after post-apocalypse, going to a larger question about epistemology and eschatology. Epistemology is the philosophy of how we know things, and eschatology is the kind of theology of last things, death, the apocalypse, judgment. This is Amnesia Moon, which Lethem has partially disowned, but it's out there. Sorry, Jonathan. Amnesia Moon is a work that takes for granted, first of all, that we are influenced by other people's realities, that reality is not simply objective, and that here the dreamers in this novel are controlling other people's worldview, that you get into people's range, and they kind of have that reality bending principle around you. And you see various visions of America, very different visions of America. I would say almost every one of these is a clear American vision. I would also throw up, I think the hippie on the strip who's messing with the McDonald's employees, I suspect that he too is a dreamer, that he is kind of responsible for what's happening in this small territory, these finite subjective realities. So this is a road trip through a surreal America, where America turns out to be, and to always have been, more than one thing, to harbor a whole bunch of incompatible, very strange fantasies about itself and the world around it.